My name is Margaret Carter. I'm 70 years old, and I live here in Charleston, South Carolina. People at the market know me as the sweet old lady who sells jars of herbal teas and salves, always with a kind word and a soft smile. They come to me for chamomile to help them sleep, peppermint for their headaches, sage for their nerves, and they say I have a gift for knowing just what someone needs. Every Saturday, I set up my little wooden stand at the corner of the square, and people stop to chat, tell me about their aches and their lives, and I listen. Most who meet me think I'm just another gentle soul who's grown old with grace. They see my hands moving easily among the dried leaves and my face lit with a quiet warmth. But what they don't see is the truth that lives behind this smile. The truth is that for almost 10 years of my life, my own son locked me inside the very house I built with my hands, the home where I raised him, and turned it into my prison. There's a reason I've learned so much about healing, because for so long, I had to find a way to heal myself from what no one could see. My only child, the boy I sacrificed everything for, used my love and my body against me in ways no mother should ever have to endure. People sometimes ask how a mother can forgive her son no matter what he's done. I wonder that too. I was just 20 when I brought Jacob into this world, scared and alone, but determined to love him with everything I had. His father left as soon as he learned I was pregnant, said he wasn't ready to be a dad, and walked away without looking back. I remember standing in that little apartment with a tiny crib and no money, promising myself that no matter what it took, my boy would never feel abandoned the way I had felt that day. I found a job at the sewing factory downtown, the kind of work that wore your fingers raw and left your back aching by the time you got home. Every morning, I was up before dawn to pack his lunch and lay out his school clothes before catching the bus into town. All day long, the clatter of sewing machines filled my ears, and the smell of hot fabric and dust clung to my skin no matter how hard I scrubbed. Even when I came home bone-tired, I'd still make sure he had a hot meal waiting. I'd sit at the kitchen table with him and go over his homework, sounding out spelling words and checking math problems, even though my own eyelids felt heavy. On weekends, I made it a point to take him to the park, just like other kids, even if all I could afford was a cone of vanilla ice cream to share on a bench. There were nights when I'd lie awake after he was asleep and wonder if I was giving him enough, if I was doing it right. But every time he wrapped his little arms around my neck and said he loved me, I believed that maybe I was. Everything I earned, every ounce of strength I could muster, was for him. I told myself over and over that I'd raise him to be a good man no matter how hard it was. And at the time, I truly believed he would be. I started noticing little things about Jacob when he was a teenager, things I didn't have the courage to name at first. It would happen in quiet moments, like when I was folding laundry and caught him staring at me from the doorway with a look I couldn't quite place. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just the awkwardness of a boy growing up and figuring himself out, but deep down, something about those glances made me uneasy. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, though. It was how long his hugs lingered when he came home from school, how his hands rested on my back just a second too long. Once, when I was cooking dinner and he came up behind me, he pressed himself against me as he wrapped his arms around my waist. My heart jumped, but he just laughed it off and said he was being affectionate, so I forced a smile even though something inside me screamed that it wasn't right. I kept blaming myself. Maybe I was imagining it because I was tired all the time, working late hours and pushing my body harder than I should have. He was my son, after all. He'd always been sweet and loving, and I told myself over and over that I must just be reading into things. But at night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the memory of his eyes following me when I walked around the house, or the strange smirk he gave me when I asked him to please give me a little space. It got worse when I started getting sick more often, when my legs began to ache, and I couldn't keep up with work like I used to. He started taking over more chores around the house, but his attitude shifted. He seemed almost pleased to see me weakened, and there was something in his tone when he said I should rest that didn't sound like kindness. I told myself I was imagining that too, because what kind of mother thinks those thoughts about her own child? Sometimes after a long bath, I'd catch him waiting outside the bathroom door, pretending to need to talk to me. Or he'd walk into my bedroom without knocking, saying he just wanted to check if I was okay. And yet his eyes would drop to my robe or the hem of my nightgown in a way that sent a chill down my spine. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed and whispered to myself that it was just exhaustion making me paranoid. I told myself that Jacob loved me and that he would never hurt me. But in the pit of my stomach, that quiet, gnawing fear wouldn't go away. It was the kind of fear you don't want to name because naming it makes it real. And I wasn't ready to admit just how real it already was. It happened on a hot afternoon in July, the kind of day where the factory air felt thick and heavy. I was at my machine, as always stitching him after him, when a sharp pain shot through the back of my head so hard it knocked the breath right out of me. My vision blurred, my right hand slipped from the fabric, and the next thing I knew, the whole room was tilting, and I was sliding out of my chair to the floor. Women around me shouted my name and someone ran for the foreman, but I couldn't move. My left side was completely numb, and no matter how hard I tried, my arm just lay there like it didn't belong to me anymore. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as they called an ambulance, and in those moments, I thought maybe my time was up right there on that factory floor. At the hospital, they told me I'd had a stroke and that it was serious. The doctor explained gently that my left side might never fully recover, and I would need help with even the most basic things. My world crashed in on itself as I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I was supposed to keep my job, my home, and my dignity. When Jacob came to visit me that evening, he took my hand and told me not to worry, that he would take care of me now. In those first days at home, I was so grateful for him. He fed me, helped me sit up in bed, and even bathed me when the nurse couldn't come by. I felt ashamed needing him like that, but he smiled and said it was nothing, that I had done the same for him once. I tried to push away that uneasy voice inside me because I didn't want to believe it could be anything other than love. But it didn't take long before the cracks started to show. He insisted the nurse wasn't needed anymore, that no one could take care of me the way he could. He started locking the door when people came by to visit, telling them I was resting or in too much pain to see anyone. At first, I thought he was just being protective, but then he began making decisions for me without even asking. One morning, he told me flat out that from now on, no one else was allowed to touch me, not the nurse, not the neighbors, not even my church friends. He said I was too fragile for them, and only he knew what was best for my body. His hands lingered longer when he helped me dress, his fingers pressing into my skin in ways that made my stomach turn, but I was too weak to push him away. The more I needed him, the more he seemed to enjoy reminding me of that fact. He'd lean in close and say that without him, I wouldn't last a day, that no one else would put up with a half-paralyzed old woman. It was in those quiet moments alone, when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, that the fear began to take root. I realized then that I wasn't just trapped in my own body anymore. I was trapped with him. Those 8 years still feel like a nightmare I can't wake up from. It started so slowly, I didn't even realize what was happening to me until it was too late. At first, Jacob kept telling me he was only protecting me, that he was just making sure I was safe, and I wanted so badly to believe him because the alternative was too horrifying to say out loud. He stopped letting the nurse come at all after that first month and told the neighbors not to bother visiting. He'd stand at the door smiling, saying I was too weak for company, and close it in their faces while I lay in bed a few feet away, praying someone would push past him. The phone calls grew less and less too, because he always answered and said I was sleeping or too tired to talk. It wasn't long before I stopped seeing anyone but him. That house became my entire world, and every inch of it felt smaller and smaller with each passing day. He'd bring me food on a tray, and if I didn't eat fast enough, he'd sigh and tell me I wasn't grateful. At night, he'd stand in the doorway of my room, just watching me, his shadow on the wall, longer than mine, and my heart would pound in my chest, waiting for him to say something or leave. His hands got bolder every day, all under the excuse of caring for me. He'd say he was checking for bed sores, that he was cleaning me properly, that paralyzed women need special attention. At first, I tried to move away or cover myself, but he'd laugh and remind me that I couldn't even get out of bed without him. I hated myself for needing his help, but he was right. He would tell me no one else would ever take care of me, that the world had forgotten about me. That if he left, I'd rot in a nursing home with strangers who didn't care if I lived or died. He'd lean in close when he said those things, his breath hot on my cheek, and I'd feel trapped in my own skin with nowhere to run. And when I tried to speak up, when I begged him to stop, he would tilt his head and grin. He'd say I was confused, that the stroke had scrambled my memory, that I was imagining things. Then he'd look me dead in the eye and say no one would believe me anyway. Sometimes I'd cry quietly when he left the room, but other times the rage would boil over, and I'd scream at him to get out, to leave me alone. He never raised his voice back, never struck me. He just stared with that same sick smile and said I was lucky he even stayed. And that was worse somehow. Every day felt the same. Every bath, every meal, every touch, another reminder that I didn't belong to myself anymore. He made me feel like nothing, like just another piece of furniture in the house he owned. And no matter how much I hated him, no matter how much I hated myself for not stopping him, I couldn't. I used to lie awake at night, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, thinking about what I'd done wrong to raise a boy like him. I wondered how much of this was my fault, if I'd loved him too much or not enough. But after so many years of his threats and his hands and his lies, I stopped wondering and just prayed to wake up to something different. Even now, it's hard to put into words just how small he made me feel. Like I was no longer a mother, no longer a woman, barely even a person. Every time he whispered that no one would believe me, a part of me believed it too. And that's what kept me silent all those years. That's what kept me his prisoner. That morning started like so many others, with Jacob's hands on me and his voice low in my ear telling me I had no one but him. But something inside me snapped that day, a kind of desperate strength I didn't even know I still had. I started screaming at the top of my lungs, louder than I'd ever dared before, and kept screaming even when my throat burned and my voice cracked. For a split second, his face went pale, and I remember thinking maybe he was finally scared of me for once. He clamped his hand over my mouth, but I kept fighting, thrashing with what little strength I had left. Through the pounding in my ears, I heard the sound of someone banging on the front door and shouting my name. It was Mrs. Johnson from next door. I didn't know she'd been homesick that day, and she told me later she heard every word through the thin walls. She forced her way in while Jacob tried to block her, pushing past him and rushing to my bedside. Her eyes went wide when she saw me shaking and crying, and without a second thought, she pulled out her phone and called for help. I don't remember much of the ride to the hospital, except how bright the lights seemed after years of dim curtains and locked doors. The nurses were gentle as they rolled me into a room and started their exams, but I could feel their eyes on me, quietly piecing together the truth. A doctor with kind eyes leaned in and asked if anyone at home was hurting me, and when I managed to nod, he just put his hand over mine and told me it was going to be okay. They took photographs of bruises and ran tests. I didn't fully understand, but I could see in their faces that they believed me. It felt strange to finally be heard after all that time. The social worker came and asked me to tell her everything, and even though my voice shook and the words came slow, I said what I needed to say. I didn't see Jacob being led away, but one of the nurses told me later the police showed up right there in the hospital and handcuffed him in the hallway. They said he didn't even look back at me as they walked him out, just kept shouting that I was crazy, that everyone was making a mistake. For once, his voice didn't scare me anymore. Lying in that hospital bed that night, I stared up at the ceiling and let myself cry, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was relief. For the first time in years, the door was open, and I could finally breathe again. Something deep inside me dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, my life wasn't over yet. Grace came for me the very next morning after Jacob was arrested, and she never left my side. She held my hand through the hearings, made sure I ate, and when the doctors cleared me to start physical therapy, she was there in the room every single session. My therapist, Melissa, was firm but kind, teaching me how to trust my body again and cheering for even the smallest movements. At first, it was just learning how to sit up without help, then standing with a walker as my legs trembled beneath me. I cried the day I took 3 shaky steps on my own, and Grace cried right there with me. Every week brought another tiny victory, and little by little, I started to believe that I really could take my life back. It took almost a year, but I got strong enough to walk unassisted again. That first walk outside in the sunshine felt like a miracle, and I promised myself I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. Walking became my symbol of freedom, one deliberate step at a time. Once I was back on my feet, I knew I needed more than just my legs to feel whole. Grace reminded me of how much I'd always loved plants and natural remedies, so she signed me up for a class at a little herb shop downtown. I fell in love with it all over again, learning about every root and leaf like I was learning about myself. Within 2 years, I had saved enough to open my own stand at the market, and soon after that, my own small shop. People came for my teas and tinctures, but they stayed to talk and share their stories. Many of the women who came to me were hurting just like I'd been, and I started a quiet little support group in the back room of my shop every Tuesday evening. Helping them heal helped me heal. I became known as someone who could help you find your strength, and that made me proud. My shop became my sanctuary, a place where no one could ever control me again. 20 years passed, and one morning I looked up from my counter and saw Jacob standing in the doorway. He was thin and hunched, leaning on a cane, his skin sallow and his eyes hollow. He told me he was sick, that he had no one left, that he needed me to take care of him now. For a long moment, I just stared at him and felt nothing but a strange calm. Then I told him that he made his bed and now he could lie in it. I watched him turn and shuffle out the door, and it felt like closing a chapter I'd been carrying for too long. I want to speak now to the women listening who feel trapped, who feel powerless. Please believe me when I say your dignity is still yours, no matter what anyone has done to you. You are stronger than you know, and you are not alone. One step at a time, you can take your life back. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. And when they ask if a mother should always forgive, remember that forgiveness and survival are 2 different things. Choose yourself. Always.